Either way, you got drought, whether the ice age was coming or whether global warming. So, but listen to what he says. This is a rather disturbing quote. Stephen Schneider of the National Center for Atmospheric Research described the scientist's dilemma this way. This is a quote. On the one hand, as scientists, we are ethically bound to the scientific method, in effect promising to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, which means that we must include all the doubts, the caveats, the ifs, ands, and buts. You know, I wish they'd do that in the creation evolution issue. Man, there's so many problems there. But, on the other hand, we are not just scientists, but human beings as well. And like most people, we'd like to see the world a better place, which in this context translates into our working to reduce the risk of potentially disastrous climate change. To do that, we need to get some broad-based support to capture the public's imagination. That, of course, entails getting loads of media coverage. So we have to offer up scary scenarios, make simplified dramatic statements, and make little mention of any doubts we might have. That's pathetic. Here's one that ended up in my local paper in Bozeman, Montana. A three-part article over 3 days about the disappearing rainforests. Disappearing rainforests. With Africa ahead, the world fells 60 acres of trees a minute, imperiling climate. You know, they tell you about deforestation, but you know, trees do grow back where they've been cut, do they not? So, it's not the amount of trees being cut, it's the total amount of forests, right? Well, an expert, just before this article came out, in the National Academy of Science, said the long-term trend in forest area, that is the total area, this is tropics, by the way, receives less scrutiny than the tropical deforestation rate. We show that constructing a reliable trend is difficult and the evidence for a decline is unclear. What he's saying is that there isn't any clear evidence for a decline. In fact, it almost seems to be steady state. This is his graph from several people from about 1980. Here's one guy that says that forests are increasing, you know, and then they decrease. And this one is just steady state. This one goes down. In other words, there's no clear trend in the amount of forests in the tropics. So, you know, the person who wrote that, by the way, that's an AP article. It's probably published in your local paper, too, in February. Anyway, he should have read that and been a little more honest about the whole situation. Those are some of the things that you run up to against in this whole thing. But it's not surprising. My study of the creation evolution issue has kind of prepared me for this. Now, Bjorn Lomborg used to be a radical environmentalist until someone challenged him to actually go look at the data, the raw data for yourself instead of accepting all this baloney. So he did this. And he wrote a book called The Skeptical Environmentalist and found out that a lot of this scary stuff is just not true. He says, meteorologically unsubstantiated claims of more extreme weather are often backed up by the economic observation of ever-increasing weather-related costs. He says that the only thing they can use is because the cost of these weather disasters is increasing. But you know the reason for that? There's more people living close to the ocean and are more vulnerable to hurricanes. There's more people in floodplains, and so more people get their houses wiped out by floods. But there isn't any more floods or hurricanes. It's just that because people are building in the wrong spots, that it's costing the damages a lot higher. He goes through all this. He's a professor of statistics at a university in Denmark. And this is his book, The Skeptical Environmentalist. He also wrote a recent book in 2007 called Cool It. And the previous book focused in on many environmental issues. This one, Cool It, only focuses in on global warming. The polar bears. It's kind of interesting that we just put them on we're proposing to put them on the endangered species list. Anyway, Lomborg decided, well, let's check the data. Let's find out what the polar bears are doing. And, you know, just because Al Gore says that there's less sea ice up there doesn't mean the polar bears are drowning. You know, they can do other things besides, be stuck on the ice. He found out, but what this group really told was that the 20 distinct subpopulations of polar bears, that's in North America, one or possibly two were declining in Baffin Bay. In other words, of 20, one or two were actually the populations were declining. More than half were known to be stable, and two subpopulations were actually increasing dramatically over the past decade, from 5,000 members in the 1960s to 25,000 today, through stricter hunting regulations. So in some places, polar bears are increasing. The net change seems to be zero. There doesn't seem to be any big changes in polar bear populations. But I suppose we're going to put them on the endangered species list because of all the hype in global warming. This is his book, just came out. It's pretty good. Because he's not a meteorologist, he accepts a lot of the statistics coming out of the models from the climatologists, and so that he's a pretty objective person. That's why I trust him. But other than that, he shows you that a lot of the stuff that comes out about the harms is greatly exaggerated. What about the cost of fighting global warming? Can we afford it? It's usually minimized by alarmists. Lomborg estimated the cost of the Kyoto to meet that standard. And by the way, there's a lot of people out there that want the standard to be a lot less. In other words, they want a lot less CO2 in our industry, which would be a disaster, I'd say. Anyway, the largest assembly of the top macroeconomic model shows that an average cost of about $180 billion annually from 2008, if we are to meet the Kyoto agreements, which we won't make. I think we have till 2012. Even Europe, who thought they were going to be able to make these, will be far from it too, because their